Hello, I'm Marcia Cavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, this should be a quiet year, at least in local politics, but one election that could make some noise is that of Orleans Parish District Attorney. We'll look tonight at the issues and the contenders. Meanwhile, Mayor LaToya Cantrell is facing her own issues with her latest poll numbers. Elsewhere, firefighters are unhappy, and the controversy about the saints and the archdiocese continues to smolder. Our Future Watch segment looks at the zoo's population growth with the birth of 2 lion cubs. And we continue our annual tradition of looking at carnival satire. On the march for us are tonight's Informed Sources, Errol Laborde, producer of Informed Sources, Ramon Antonio Vargas, reporter, the Times-Picayune, the New Orleans Advocate, Don Ostrom, Channel 12's Future Watch reporter, and Stephanie Grace, columnist, the Times-Picayune, the New Orleans Advocate. And we stay with Stephanie, and let's first start talking about the upcoming race for Orleans Parish District Attorney this fall.
Right, this fall. 6-year term, so it's been 6 years since Leon Canizero was last elected. A lot's happened since then. He's had a lot of controversy over the, you remember the fake subpoenas, that's still going through the courts. Real fights with the city council over funding, arguments over things like, what to do with juveniles, juvenile justice. Do you kind of treat juveniles as criminals or more as kids? And, this is part of a larger issue that's really being fought nationally, and a lot of DA races around the country are hinging on these criminal justice reform topics that we've talked about a lot. How to reduce mass incarceration. Do you lock people up for minor offenses? Do you lock people up for, drug, nonviolent offenses? Bail, should there be cash bail? All of these issues. And how you treat juveniles is part of that. And the interesting thing about this is the big race. It's the marquee race this year, and it's pretty quiet so far. There are more questions than answers, including, is Leon Canizero going to run for re-election? He hasn't said. Jason Williams, the city councilman who is a defense attorney by trade, he has said that he will run, but he hasn't kind of officially announced he's running, and he hasn't really put a campaign together. And, both Ramon and I have been hearing persistent rumors that maybe he will, maybe he won't. There's a criminal court judge who just retired, Arthur Hunter. He is expected to run. He also hasn't announced. So
there's also rumors Kiva Landrum Johnson, who was
right.
also a judge at Tulane and Broad, and
was the interim DA
post Eddie Jordan, right?
Yes.
So she's got that experience
right.
on both sides of the.
And I think, there are probably, we talk about lanes in the presidential race, the moderate lane, the liberal lane. Here, I think we have the kind of traditional tough on crime lane and the criminal justice reform lane. And I think that is how the race will shape up. If it's Leon Canizero, he's the traditional tough on crime guy. If it's Jason Williams, he's the criminal justice reform guy, probably. Arthur Hunter could be that guy. But we don't know. As of the end of the year, Leon Canizero had $300,000 to spend. Jason Williams had $60,000. They could probably raise money quickly once they get started. But it's, I do expect it to be a very contested, heated race. It's just
quiet right now.
It's quiet right now.
Well, we should mention that the primary is not until November. There'll be the same ballot as the presidential
correct.
election.
Which means a big turnout.
And so you can expect a heavy turnout on that.
Yeah.
So I think we're at the phase, we're at the behind the scenes phase right now, and that's probably pretty intense. I would think the public phase wouldn't be until maybe after Labor Day.
Right.
And
Now,
it'll be very intense after that.
Right.
But with that big turnout in November, the runoff, you tell me, is in December.
In December.
And so it's going to probably be a very low turnout. So it's going to be a high turnout primary and a
Yes.
low turnout runoff.
If there's a runoff. If there are 2 major candidates, there may not be.
And qualifying
is July. So there actually is going to be a very long period between when people sign up and when they run. So, there will be plenty of time to hash all of this out. One thing I should mention that there is likely to be outside money. There are national groups. George Soros is one of the people who is investing in some of these DA races around the country. And these, kind of reformist criminal justice, reduce mass incarceration types have won some very big elections around the country in big cities Chicago, Philadelphia, Boston. I mean, these are big races, and New Orleans is really kind of ripe for something like that, I think.
And so the bench, the criminal court bench.
Yes.
All of those seats
They're
are also going to be
correct,
up?
and there are 2 open criminal court judgeships.
And we don't think there's going to be a special election to fill
No,
those, right?
because there isn't even a possible date
Yeah.
when there could be. So that's, most of the incumbents tend to not have challengers unless they've had some sort of public difficulty. But that's where you talk about behind the scenes jockeying. That's where the jockeying happens. Like, you run for this seat, you run for that seat. I'm going to wait till next year and run for this seat. And because, of course, most of the people that really care are lawyers. It's not something that usually engages the public very much because most people don't go to court and see what happens. And
Well, except when you start talking about crime and
Yeah.
and people want to lock them up, sort of district
Right.
attorneys, that makes an issue.
Right, but again, we've really gotten away from that in a lot of places. So I think it'll be very interesting to see how, if it's Leon Cannizzaro, how that philosophy plays in an electorate like Orleans.
I've seen races for assessor where someone says
Yeah.
he's going to be tough on crime.
Oh,
right? So
absolutely, yes.
So it's the all-purpose issue.
Right, right.
Okay, so DA's race in Orleans up.
Yes, and actually the
progress.
other DA races too around the state. I mean, we're waiting. I guess we'll wait and see if there are some seriously contested ones.
Yeah, okay, well, we're just beginning the discussion on
Yes.
that then. Okay, thanks a lot, Steph. Ramon, over to you. Something that has been out there in public discussion over the past few weeks, really, it's the situation with the Archdiocese of New Orleans and the list of the credibly accused clergy in terms of child sexual predatory activity, and the New Orleans Saints. The plaintiffs for victims are saying that emails need to be released that show that the Saints were guiding the Archdiocese, and more than guiding, in terms of PR and handling the release of that list.
Sure. And these emails came up in the context of one lawsuit involving a victim of an alleged victim of a deacon and suspected, I guess, serial child predator named George Brignac. The plaintiff's attorneys in that case also represent several other plaintiffs who have similar claims against other people on the abusive clergy list. But long story short, I mean, there are these emails that came up that show communications between the Saints, primarily longtime Gail and Tom Benson spokesman, as well as team spokesman Greg Bensel, as well as the Archbishop Gregory Amond, the Archdiocesan spokeswoman Sarah McDonald, and that's about all the two sides agree on. There are very competing interpretations of what the emails show. You've got one side, the plaintiffs, who claim that, in essence, that using the Saints and all that they kind of mean, and working with other unspecified community leaders to essentially soften media coverage of Amond. As the list came out, the plaintiffs' attorneys have long said that there are more priests and deacons who should be on the list who are not. And so a lot of it was geared towards softening media coverage, and as well as communications with unspecified media outlets. There's a finite number of media outlets that could be referring to. And so then on the other side, the Saints are like, all we were doing is trying to get the list in advance to reporters, and really, I mean, I can say now that outlets received the list, I think, a few hours ahead of an embargo, so that you kind of digest it, and then you sat down with the Archbishop to question whoever was on there, what was kind of behind the list and things like that. And I mean, I can say we've reported it openly that I mean, Greg Bensel was in that room, didn't participate, at least in our session, and at least in one other session that I know of didn't participate, but was in there. And so, I mean, so essentially that's it. It's like, well, look, all we did, that was one thing we did to coordinate getting the list out so that it was reported accurately. And then also we just said be as open and as transparent as possible.
Could it be as innocent enough as Gail Benson and the Archbishop are friends, and they're talking,
Yes, and
she says, hey, I've got a great guy, let me put you in touch with him, and they're just helping out.
Yes, and that is certainly what the Saints have said. Now, we also were able to report that that U.S. District Judge Jay Zaney, who is as famously devoutly Catholic as Gail Benson is, said it was my idea for Greg Bensel, who was a personal friend, who was a personal friend, and they both have ties to Jesuit High School, which is also a very prominent Catholic institution, who was like, look, I think, there have been steps taken to prevent something like the abuse that's on the list from happening again. I don't think that message is getting out there, and I think Greg Bensel can help you do that.
Like
and
disaster
Bensel,
media help instead of hiring someone you don't know.
And obviously Bensel has managed Bountygate, has managed several scandals around the Saints. The family fight between the late Tom Benson and things like
So
that.
he
So
is really a seasoned PR professional. He definitely, there's no doubt about that. But the Archdiocese does have its own PR apparatus.
Yes, but I mean, certainly, I don't think there's any other organization that would have an apparatus with the Saints like to remind you that they have 10 million people at the push of a button that they can reach on Twitter.
So, okay, the issue of these emails still, and the plaintiffs' counsel, they say, they want the public to read these emails, and there really isn't any opposition in terms of the Archdiocese, but they say not until it's really in public record, until it's introduced.
Right, and there is a lot of opposition to getting the emails out, but they're like, well, there's nothing concerning in there, there's nothing untoward in those emails. We just want them to be at a public trial or at a at a hearing with testimony and evidence. But I mean, sometimes you get close to trial, and then there's a move to close the courtroom, and then and things like that.
Speculation about other names. And
sure, absolutely. So I guess that dispute, I think, will play out. There are some court dates that have been kind of set more in the intermediate time frame, but anything that's decided at the civil district courthouse can be appealed to the state appellate court and can appeal to the state Supreme Court. So I think it'll be a while. I mean, you never can really tell how these things are going to play out, but my experience is that usually things in court are later rather than sooner.
Okay, well, we'll see how it all plays out. Thanks a lot, Ramon. Okay, Dawn, over to you, and let's talk about something very pleasant.
Much more pleasant.
Lion cubs.
Baby lion cubs, who we talked on this show about a couple weeks ago, just that they were born. There were 3 cubs born. 2 have survived, 2 little male cubs. They're part of the new lion exhibit at the zoo. They are not on exhibit yet, but the exhibit just opened last May, and it's part of the Species Survival Program, which is really an international program to help species survive. It's pretty aptly named. But the goal is to breed animals. So they started with this pride of lions, 1 male and 3 females. They picked 1 female to be the breeding female. The other 2 females are actually on lion birth control. And as soon as they bred, they treated that female as if she was pregnant. And sure enough, she was, and gave birth to the cubs. It's the 2 males who survived. They are, I'm told, fun and playful, super fun to watch, and they will be on exhibit at the zoo sometime later this spring. They're currently about 10 pounds. They'll be about 20 pounds once they go on exhibit. They can't come out on exhibit until they've had all their vaccinations. So to put that in perspective, about 20 pounds of lion, their dad is over 400 pounds. So they still will be really tiny, cute little things to watch. They are... When you're part of the Species Survival Program, you're really, quote, an insurance population. You're genetically healthy and perfect, and if lions go into danger in the wild, they could reintroduce lions from this population of breeders around the country or the world to the wild. That's not the plan. It's not likely to happen. They will likely remain zoo lions throughout their existence. These 2 little boy cubs will stay here at Audubon Zoo for up to 2 years, or maybe a little longer. The way it works in the lion world is at some point these boys will buck up to their dad and fight for dominance. And once they start bucking up to dad and fighting for dominance, they're removed from the situation and they move on. They could go together.
That's the history of all wars among humans.
Exactly. The men are going to buck up and try to take charge. They could go together because the boys won't fight apparently for dominance if they start out as brothers. They'll stay on and get along. So they could go together, they could go separately and become part of breeding programs elsewhere. But it just points to the success of this Species Survival Program. There's also been a baby orangutan born recently, a pair of babirusa, some success also with reptiles, birds, and other mammals. And the program is monitored around the world. It's all part of the Aquariums and Zoo Association, or Association of Zoos and Aquariums.
What's a
Forgive me.
Barbarossa?
Barbarossa is a large rodentish creature.
Like a nutria?
I can't. My description doesn't go any
How about
further
the
than that.
other? How about the other two lionesses? Will that be used for?
They will not, because the three are sisters. They've chosen the one who will be used for now. The other two will just remain on birth control. But the female lions work together and like to be together. The way it's done in the wild is the mom would go off and give birth, and she would keep her cubs separate from everybody for a while. So the cubs are still separate from. They have interaction with their mom, but they're still separate from their aunts, so to speak, mom, in the lion world. They will be reintroduced to the ants soon and then they'll become more family-like once they're all on display. But it will be that one lion named Kaylee, who continues to be the breeding lion. She could be bred again in 12 to 18 months, but they won't breed her again until the cubs have moved on. And gestation is only 3.5 months
Oh, really?
for lions, so it doesn't take too long for lion
how old
babies
are
to
the
come
cubs now?
about.
What are they?
They are a couple months old.
Well, we can't wait till we can see them.
Do we know their names?
You can. They have not been named yet.
Okay.
You can, if you're an Instagrammer or Facebook person. The zoo does post frequent pictures of them to follow, and they're adorable to watch. So they'll be fun once they're on display this spring.
All right. All right. Well, Errol, it's carnival time and time for carnival satire. And you.
Well, for most of Carnival's history, satire has had a role, except during Reconstruction. They tried to do some satire, and the Union people said, we don't get satire, okay? But now there's several crews that do satire, muses and chaos, and as we speak, La Crue d'Etat, which is pretty. And we have some of the sketches from La Crue d'Etat. The first sketch you see is this is a regular flex called the High Priest, and the High Priest is that skeleton figure. And the theme this year is the dictator. The crew doesn't have a king, it has a dictator. And so this is called The Dictator Goes to Mardi Gras. And you see what it looks like when skeletons have a second line, that they're second lining right there. And of course, the slogan for Crue d'Etat is "Ride to live and live to ride," which we should all consider as we go through as we go through life. The second one that we have is it has to do with assessments. There's Assessor Errol Williams sitting at the front and having to deal with the high assessments, holding a banner that says "It ain't my fault," and then down at the bottom you see Williams talking to Latoya Cantrell about the assessment bill, and she's saying, "It ain't my fault." So it's a theme that we see over there.
I wrote a column with that theme, actually.
Okay.
Yes.
The next one is Boat Parade, and this is about just all the drainage problems that we've had in the city. And you see some boats going by Parkway Tavern, which is also Parkway Tavern in Harbor at this point, but it's a spoof on that. And then the next one is Mardi Gras Migration. Oh yeah, this is about people who leave town from Mardi Gras. I see a lot of people go to Disneyland and who go and they go skiing. And somewhere you'll see one of those talk bubbles. Here they've gone through all their trouble and the kids complaining, but they're not throwing beads. And then the next one is not really a satire, but I thought it was sort of touching. This is a tribute, Mardi Gras Mambo. This is a tribute to the great figures we've lost in the past year with Dr. John up front and some of the other people. So it's a nice touch.
All right, as usual.
Yeah.
Yeah, some interesting topics and beautiful floats. All righty, thanks a lot. Ramon, we're going to go back on over to you and another controversial subject out there in the community, and that's regarding New Orleans firefighters and the union versus the fire chief, basically, and disagreements between the two. Where's that leading to?
So, I mean, the union has several grievances, and some of them involve kind of difficult topics, pension reform, and the rate at which they are paid for overtime details that firefighters sometimes work in association with like certain events where there's outdoor cooking. But really, the flashpoint is overtime, and there's, I think both sides agree that there's been a staffing shortage for years, that the department is not ideally sized, and the city has long said that it's been about 60 firefighters short of its authorized strength. the union has long maintained that it's actually a bigger gap. But in any sense, there's not enough firefighters, and one of the ways, the primary way that they've been coping is to work for firefighters to work voluntary overtime, and you're talking about like 90+ hour work weeks, which the union said has reached a point where it is overly fatiguing firefighters physically and mentally and creating a dangerous situation, and so they've declined recently, several days ago, started declining to work voluntary overtime, which then triggered a response where the city canceled the fire chief really implemented a directive where vacations and annual leave had been canceled to ensure that there were enough bodies in the city to be able to staff the fire department if it came down to it. There was a provision for mandatory overtime that they said wouldn't be necessary if firefighters showed up to work as normal. Of course, the problem is that that is typically mandatory overtime is typically reserved for like hurricane or just some calamity, usually a natural or I know there was some overtime when at the initial days of the Hard Rock collapse where they needed firefighters just on the edge of the site or actually going to the site try to find potential survivors. So then, first Saturday of Uptown parades this year. I think 1 in 3 firefighters that were scheduled to work called in sick. There was a disagreement over whether, the union said many of those firefighters had a day already scheduled off that wasn't canceled. So there's obviously just unrest and over labor, and so the firefighters are hoping to kind of get some concessions, and the city has been resistant to sitting down at the table yet, saying that these are hardball tactics. In the end, they just earlier this week have agreed to sit down between March 2nd and March 6th to try to make some headway on the grievances. And
so if personnel is needed, can the city look to other areas, other communities?
So yes, but it would be, there was if everyone remembers, I think in 2019, the Rex House caught fire, huge fire, took days to put out. They called in, I think virtually every firefighter on duty responded to the scene in the initial hours of it. That left some fire stations uncovered, so Jefferson Parish firefighters came in. So from surrounding parishes, they can come in to just kind of respond to calls from certain neighborhoods. I think that is one scenario where those surrounding departments would be willing to do. The union has asked, and according to the union, has been given the thumbs up on declining to cover where the shortage is created by firefighters declining voluntary overtime to kind of cover, which is obviously their tool to try to put pressure on the city to resolve some issues. So they've asked. So yes, in theory they could bring that in, but it's another question about whether it would essentially be breaking the line. I mean, I know it's not a strike, but they're kind of trying to be in solidarity with the New Orleans firefighters.
So a lot of various issues that need to still be resolved. So we'll be hearing about this over time too.
That's right.
Okay, thanks a lot, Ramon. Stephanie, over to you. Latest poll on the mayor of New Orleans.
Right. This is a poll by Ed Chervenak and one of his associates. He, was at UNO. It's an automated poll. It came out the other day, and it showed that the mayor, LaToya Cantrell, has a 53% approval rating, which is, it's fine. It's not where she has been in the past. This poll previously 2 years ago had her at 57%. Other polls that she's taken internally, we are told, have had her significantly higher. She's about halfway through her term, and it's been a rough stretch for her, I have to say. There's been a lot of negative news. Really, end of last year, beginning of this year, something she has, were not her fault, the Hard Rock Hotel falling, the cybersecurity attack, but there's been some criticism of how she's responded and how she's communicated. And then some things are traced back to her, like the tax liens that we've reported on that she still has not explained on her home. And what else? There was a pretty damning Inspector General report on how they're handling traffic cameras, which is one of her signature issues, the firefighters, a number of things. So given all that, 53% I think is pretty good. One thing that's interesting in the poll is that her disapproval number has shot up quite a bit. It's still below 50%, so it's in the 40s. but it used to be 17%. So the real shift, I think, has been not people who liked her and don't like her as much, but people who weren't so sure about her, didn't have a strong opinion, who've moved into the disapprove column. So we don't know whether they will stay there or not. I mean, it could just be kind of, a situational thing because with all this bad news.
So it's at this moment in time.
It's
sort
at
of
a pulse-
midway into her administration.
It's just about
right?
midway. She's getting ready to launch her campaign for a re-election. As of now, there's no serious challenger. New Orleans mayors tend not to get serious challengers. Ray Nagin was the exception. He got a serious challenger in Mitch Landrieu, but he won, remember? And so, she's probably okay, but we'll see. And another thing to note, even when you kind of look at the subgroups, she is almost twice as popular among African American voters as among white voters. So that's something to watch. About 66% of black voters approve, 30-something% of white voters. Men more positive than women, which I thought was really interesting because you hear her talk all the time about being the glass ceiling breaker, the first woman mayor of New Orleans.
Women tend to judge women far more harshly
It's
than
very-
men judge women.
There you go. That could be it.
So that race comes up 2021.
2021, so she has a shortened term, remember? So
Every mayor since the current home rule charter was passed in '54, which put a 2-term limit,
Yeah.
every mayor has been reelected to a
Reelected.
second term.
yep.
Well,
Even
we'll
Ray
see if
Nagin.
Even Ray Nagin. I mean, if he could do it.
Yeah, he could come back and Ray Nagin.
Yes.
that happens. That's not too far away. Thinking about
It's
it.
not.
but,
All of a sudden, I
really,
just
we'll
realized
see a
today,
mayor's
wait,
campaign
that's next year.
Okay. Well, right now it's time to look ahead.
Yes.
Higgins Gate Apartments in Algiers, which has been blighted for over a decade, today was the first phase in restoring them. It's been a long time project of Councilman Palmer and Mayor Cantrell, so that they're going to start cleaning up today. And I love Cantrell's words. She says, Higgins Gate Apartments, Lord have mercy. So the Lord is, in fact, having mercy.
Okay. Ramon.
Retired Lieutenant General Chuck Pittman, who piloted a helicopter, really without permission to do so, during the 1973 sniper attack and helped put a stop to it by doing so, died recently on February 13th. His funeral, plans for a funeral March 9th at Marine Corps Base Quantico are in the works.
You did a piece on him some years back,
Yes,
did you?
yes, and we did a obit, longer style obit, NOLA.com/crime/news/crime_police. You can
It's
find it there.
terrific. Yeah.
Interesting to read his story and what he did. All right,
Yeah.
thanks a lot, Ramon.
After a lengthy break from New Orleans for the Pelicans due to the All-Star game and just Mardi Gras, they are back in action a week from tonight and then have 4 home games in 7 days. And these games could be crucial to, if there's any possibility to see them in the postseason. Plus, Zion's just fun to watch.
Yes.
Steph?
The other big election this fall is Bill Cassidy running for re-election. A lot of U.S. Senate races around the country are getting very heated already. Cassidy announced his re-election this week. Probably not so heated. He does have a challenger, a man named Antoine Pierce, who's a Democratic community organizer. Tough uphill climb for him.
All right. Always elections in our future.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot, guys, for being here. Thank you all for joining us. Have a wonderful, safe Mardi Gras. We'll see you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.